that campaign for me is the ultimate, is the epitome of a client wants to be brave, a client wants to get to something that is really disruptive. You have the perfect ally and partner to get there. And I've seen that happening so many times. When your client is ambitious, when they want to do something great, that's really when you get to do something great. Yeah. And for the record, they got sued.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
People don't buy from websites. People buy from people. That's a quote from Flint McLaughlin from session 7 of our free digital marketing course. And it's true of your advertising and marketing as well, which is what attracted me to the application from our next guest. He said, if you don't like it, nobody else will. I love that because I hear that as bringing humanity to your marketing. I've been in so many meetings where people are coming up with ideas and it's like, wait a minute, the audience would never believe that. Potential customers would never believe that. Like, would you really believe that? So I hear that quote, if you don't like it, nobody else will. If you don't put yourself and your personal influences and your likes and dislikes in the work, nobody else is really going to engage with it. It got me thinking, musicians, novelists, comedians, these other artists, they pour themselves into their work. Why shouldn't marketing and advertising creatives do the same? That's just one of the lessons we'll learn from our guest today, Carlo Cavallone, the Global Chief Creative Officer and a partner at 72 and Sunny. Thanks for joining us today, Carlo.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me today.
Great. So let's talk about your background real quick. I just going through your LinkedIn. I love it. You started out as a translator and editor of DC Batman comics in your very early days. That sounds like the coolest job. Then you went on to be a writer at Bozell FCB, Leo Burnett, and Wieden & Kennedy. And for the past 12 years, you've been at 72 and Sunny, an agency owned by Stagwell. Now you are a partner. You're on the leadership team, overseeing over 400 people in the whole agency, and you are the Global Chief Creative Officer. So tell us, what does it mean to be the Global Chief Creative Officer?
It means working with a lot of different time zones. It means having very long days. But it also means having a great overview of what happens in the world and looking at work from a lot of different regions and working with a lot of different people and cultures, which is what I always done throughout the last 20 years of my career. So that's exciting.
Yeah, the stories you brought us today come from all over the world. So let's hop into some of those. So let's start the first half of the podcast. We always talk about the things our guest has made because we as marketers, as advertisers, it's kind of unique about our job, right? I've never been an actuary or a podiatrist or any of those things, but I know that we walk away, we've made something, the campaigns and brands we've made. It's exciting. So let's talk about the first lesson that you had was actually, I guess it's from something you didn't make, right? You said,
right.
Never, ever go on a shoot without a fully approved concept. So it sounds like there's a painful story behind that, Carlo. What happened there?
Oh, it's very painful. But, sometimes I thought I would write a book about this story. And thanks for the opportunity of telling it. This was for a big telecom company, global company. I won't name it, but maybe you'll guess which one is it in a little while. And, we were supposed to, I was working at Wieden & Kennedy, and we were working on this global platform, a big launch. And we had your classic long creative development process. And finally, everything is approved. We go to LA to begin this shoot that was going to be like a 2-week shoot. And I remember I was waiting for my car at the rental car place, and someone called me and told me, well, the script wasn't really approved. Someone saw it and they had notes. And I was like, oh no, here we go. And so that's how it started. I remember really being on the line for the car, and this phone call was like, this is gonna end terribly. because the script wasn't really approved. There was another stakeholder somewhere that had some notes. So the first thing is like, we get to the hotel and we get on a conference call, and we realize that actually everything had been unapproved. And the only option was like, write again. But we were supposed to start production the next day. And we were like, how can we start production if we don't have a script? And the answer was like, well, we'll see as we go. And, at that time, with the hindsight, we should have said, okay, this is it. The project is not happening. Let's go back to Amsterdam and finish it here, reconvene, rebrief and everything. But no, we were like, okay, we'll go for it. Let's start to rewrite. So what happened from then was that we basically would try to write these different vignettes for a big script every day. We would try to get them approved, go through the approval process with the client. At the same time, we would talk with the production company and try to prepare for a shoot maybe a week later. And this process started, I don't know, at the beginning of August and ended at the end of September. So because we didn't have a really approved script at the start. So for 2 months, we traveled between LA, South America, we were in Argentina, in Brazil, writing stuff, trying to produce it, involving celebrities. And we ended up spending £8 million. And it was like 2005. So you can imagine, you can think about how much that is now. So we ended up spending £8 million to put together the most incredible piece of trash I ever worked on.
And never saw the light of day, huh?
Never saw the light of day. I remember we were editing as we went. We had an editor joining us in the process along the way. We were trying to make sense of things, but it made no sense. Because again, every day things were approved and then maybe not approved. And then when we shot, we really didn't know if they would work together. It's a crazy, it's the craziest process I've been part of.
That sounds painful. And so, if anyone listening feels like this is unique to the marketing industry, because I started my career at an advertising agency, and this is so painful when you're dealing with an indecisive client when you thought you had approval. So I then worked in the software industry, and I found that, software and tech projects, they're even worse. If you think burning, 20 billion pounds on nothing is a lot of, 20 million pounds on nothing is a lot of money. My gosh, that, those big tech projects that never get anywhere, they can burn hundreds of millions of dollars and more to getting nothing. But let me ask you this. So I on the podcast recently, I interviewed the CMO of Mint Mobile, Aaron North, and he was giving us an example of they were going to shoot a commercial, I think it was later that day, and that day, Dave Foley, who is an actor on News Radio, had tweeted, hey, I'd love to be on a Mint Mobile spot. And within the 24 hours, they had gotten him signed to a spot, they wrote a script for him, they shot him, and they got him in the commercial, and it aired, within a few days. And so something I've seen, and I want to, you're talking about a story from 20 years ago, have you seen the big brands get better about accelerating their pace and kind of giving creatives more freedom and trying to kind of be a little more grassroots with, some of the changes we've seen with social and digital and all those things?
What do you mean about giving creators more freedom? You mean more decision power? Is that what you mean?
Well, so we've seen, for example, Oreo during the Super Bowl, don't dunk in the dark. And, some big brands seeing that, hey, we can't necessarily take this, big, archaic, long-winded approach to everything. We kind of got to get a little quicker,
Okay,
a
yeah.
little real time, kind of work more engaged with the creatives.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I've seen that happening. Not every brand, though. I think some brands are braver, and some brands are okay with going real time and trying things. I think Oreo is a great example of that. Other brands don't like that. Other brands are good at preparing spontaneous things. So the process behind the scenes is very long and sometimes convoluted. But then they are able to act fast when the day comes. I think a lot of brands that work with the Super Bowl now are good at that. But are big brands capable of being fast and spontaneous and letting other people decide? I don't see that so much. Yeah,
All right, well, let's talk about another hard fought campaign you had where it did involve a lot of rewrites, but this time it saw the light of day. Maybe it's never done. You said better is temporary, and this was not from the Super Bowl, but it was from the World Cup. So tell us about this story.
Yeah, I think I worked with Nike for a long, long time. I think they're an amazing marketer. I think that everything they do is based on you know trying things and going through 1,000 concepts until they find the one that works. And when we worked on the 2006 World Cup, it was no different. The creative process was like a crazy marathon. I think it lasted like 18 months. And basically, every 6 months, there was a moment where we were like, oh, we sold it. This is the campaign. And then we're like, not yet. We have time. So I remember, me and some other people just living through this weird period of our lives. We would just, wake up, write a new World Cup campaign, go to bed, and go again. And like that again for like, I would say 12 months until it was, there was no time left. And I remember us all going to Portland, to Nike headquarters, being in a room, and literally the next day we would have to go and present the final idea. And I was with 2 or 3 other people, and then someone said, "Oh, what about disrupting a football show?" And we, one of those pundit shows, and we're like, "Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Let's write to that." And so, after 12, 14 months of well thought out campaigns and everything, someone came up with something that seemed very promising and probably, more interesting than a lot of other things we saw before. And in 2 hours, I think we put together the campaign that then we ended up producing. And the campaign itself was another crazy journey because, again, when you work with Nike, you have a lot of variables like the athletes you work with keep changing, the situations keep changing, scripts keep changing, but ultimately, unlike the telecom project I was talking about, we ended up making a very interesting campaign called Jogo Bonito, which was kind of redefining how you communicated about football as soccer back then. And again, it was all like this relentless journey towards trying to beat the previous campaign, the previous script that ended with this crazy brainstorm in Portland that then led to the campaign. So that was a big lesson. Working on Nike has been a big lesson in general because you learn resilience and you learn that you have to keep pushing until you get to something that you really, really like and excites you. So yeah, that was the journey. And I remember that then, uh, personal fact. Uh, my daughter was 1 year old back then, and the post production was almost as long as the pre production and the concepting of that campaign. And so I remember my daughter being with me in editing rooms, you know, in in the background as we went through, 100 different cuts of our commercials.
Well, let me ask you. So, do you think that made the work better? So, earlier on the podcast, I interviewed the CMO of Satva, Joe McCambly, and he talked about early in his career, there were always 99 ideas that never saw the light of day for every one that, actually became something. And so, he's like, that's just what it takes with creativity. That's what it takes. You got to, get through all that to get to the right idea. Do you think that long, arduous process at the end of the day, did that create a better campaign?
It did. I think it did. It definitely added more depth to everything we were doing, because a lot of the initial ideas we had throughout those months were really good ideas, but probably were a little superficial when it comes to, what are we saying about football? What are we saying about athletes? By the time we get to the idea, we had so much knowledge about the subject matter and what we were doing that the campaign was definitely better, or at least it was more meaningful, had more gravitas, which I think it's, a lot of the Nike work I've been involved with, but also before me, after me. One thing that is really interesting is that there's always some kind of like, I would call it gravitas, or different layers within the work that other brands don't get to. And I think it's because you really, really have to sweat through it. You really have to understand the sport, the athletes, the context, the cultural context. Everything is so thought out. Joke. I remember, we wanted to have little jokes in every commercial, and we had to rewrite those, 20 times until we got to something that people were like, okay, this could work. And other brands operate like that, but I think ultimately, yes. The short answer is yes. I think that process in that case makes the work better because it's very purposeful.
Yeah, I know. I've found that too. I found that, when you sometimes those first ideas, or at least for me, like I think they're brilliant ideas, but they're actually pretty obvious. It's just because,
Yeah.
you're not used to that industry. You haven't spent a lot of time in there. And so externally, these seem so great, but they're obvious. And it takes kind of sweating through and grinding through those obvious ideas and really learning about and research and getting into that industry that you get the real gold.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, none of this work. Sorry, yeah, none of this really good work could happen without good clients. You said if your client is not as ambitious as you are, you're not going to do anything great. So tell us this story. I think it was Benetton that
Yeah.
was a really ambitious client.
I mean, this lesson for me is the most important lesson of them all. Like that I found to be true 100% of the times. Like, because you can sweat through work and the work might not be good. But, ultimately, in advertising, marketing, if your counterpart is not as ambitious, as driven, as, if they don't look for opportunities as much as you do, it's never going to happen. And I think, I don't believe in the idea that a creative alone or agency alone can come up with incredible work and sell it. It's always like a two-way thing. So Benetton was really interesting because they had been a very relevant, disruptive brand in the 80s and 90s. And so in 2010, I received this phone call while I was already working with 72 and Sunny by the chairman of Benetton, Alessandro Benetton. And they wanted to meet. And so I went to see them, and I met Alessandro and the head of marketing back then called Gianluca Pastore. And they were like, we want to go back to be relevant, and we want to do something disruptive, and we want to do something people talk about. And I was like, okay. But, if you remember the old Benetton work, most of it was so shocking and provocative that, it might be difficult to do something exactly like that today. So my first reaction was like, how disruptive, how shocking, how you want to be? And they were like, a lot. we want to end up in trouble. And I was like, okay, trouble, good brief. And I was like, we can do trouble. Like, let's try. And so we started working with Fabrica also, which is the internal agency at Benetton. It was a collaboration between 72 and Sunny and Fabrica. And we came up with this campaign called Unhate, which is, it's based on the idea of tolerance, with a big message of tolerance, and the brand promoting not so much love, but the idea that at least you can tolerate each other. And the most interesting expression of it was these pictures, Photoshop comps of world leaders kissing each other. And we started working on that campaign and a few other campaigns. And then went back to Alessandro Benetton and said, this is the campaign that is going to shock people. And these are other campaigns that you could do. What do you want to do? And he said, I want to get sued. So we went for that one. We went for Unhate. We went for these crazy images of world leaders kissing, and it was we had Obama kissing Chavez. We had the South Korean and North Korean president kissing. We had the Pope kissing the imam of the mosque in Cairo, so a Muslim leader. So some of these images in the campaign itself was mega provocative and and controversial. And then we launched it. There was a whole PR play, and we launched it globally, and we had an event. And I was really afraid. I was like, what's going to happen here? So I remember switching off my phone that day and not wanting to know anything. And then someone reached me and said, no, you have to look at stuff. The campaign is exploding. It's number one trending topic on Twitter. It's all over the place. It's on the Huffington Post. It's on CNN. They're interviewing Alessandro Benetton on CNN. And this thing is exploded. And I remember, then calling the head of marketing, and he was like, we're so happy. We're so happy because, everybody is so angry with us. So, that's an extreme example because Benetton is a very specific brand. But that campaign for me is the ultimate, is the epitome of a client wants to be brave. A client wants to, get to something that is really disruptive, and you have the perfect ally and partner to get there. And I've seen that happening so many times when your client is ambitious, when they want to do something great, that's really when you get to do something great. And and for the record, they got sued.
Oh my God. Well, for everyone listening, I mean, we have a lot of people on the brand side, on the marketing side here. I mean, I think that's a great lesson in being supportive of your advertising creative agencies. And not that everyone is out for the same thing that Benetton was,
No.
but I think one key thing too that the marketers can support with, or the brand side can support with, is helping identify the value proposition.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So for Benetton, I guess the value proposition was edgy, right? So what they were going for, they were trying to build a value proposition on that. If I'm wearing a Benetton shirt, people will know, hey, I'm the guy that likes that unhate campaign. It's edgy, right? I mean, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's exactly. Every time I present that campaign, and in our creds, or I present the campaign to anyone, like the premise is always, this is Benetton, that this works for them. So I'm not trying to say that this is the kind of work everybody should do. That for me is just an example of a brand just going full in with their purpose, with their identity, with their tone of voice, and deciding to do something really bold. But that doesn't work at all for other brands, and that's not a recipe for success for other brands. It's just the premise. I think that is really important. That if you are so sure that your brand stands for something and can speak in a certain way, you get behind it. That's when I think you can get to something really, really.
Yeah, so that was a great example of, that was the value proposition for Benetton, right? Maybe it's not obviously for anyone, that's the value proposition for Benetton, but at least I would say they had a value proposition. There was a clear value proposition. There was something they wanted to create with the ad. I love your next example because I don't think there was a value proposition. It was just a big budget, right? So you said, does it all make sense? And you had this massive budget, but it doesn't seem like it came together in a clear value proposition. You want to tell us that story?
Yeah, that was for a big international soda brand that sponsors the Olympics. And that's another project where you have all the ingredients in theory, but they don't come together because there's no clear purpose or value proposition. And it was a project for the Olympics a few years ago, for the Winter Olympics. And I remember, the whole conversation was like, we have this amazing performing artist, is going to make a soundtrack. We have to shoot in Rome because the Olympics were in Italy, in this amazing scenario. We want this actor, this athletes and everything. And we're like, okay, let's do it. And I think, again, we went and wrote a lot of different ideas for the campaign, different scripts. But I think ultimately the problem is that there was no core idea, and there was nobody really had a strong point of view. I mean, we tried, but from the client side also there was no strong point of view on what this project should do, what it should be about. It was just like, yeah, it's a sponsorship, and but every time we try to, express a sharper point of view, maybe it was too provocative, or maybe it wasn't exactly in line with what the Olympic Committee would allow. And I think that happens a lot working with large organizations, that whatever message you want to or point of view you want to bring forward, it gets diluted or it cannot be fully expressed. So I remember, shooting this project, recording the music track, doing the whole thing. And then the first day we went into the editing room, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This this is like, could be 60 seconds of a logo or a can, and it would be better. Just use the music track and your logo. I don't know, like it was like, this is not a story. This is not saying anything about the Olympics, or the athletes or anyone. So we were all responsible for that. But the thing is, like, again, there was no clear value proposition. There was no real purpose. There was just like a brand saying, "Hey, we are here." And that never works, of course. But I'm always amazed by how many resources sometimes go into these projects.
Yeah, I mean, I've found too, sponsorships can be the worst because there is not always a strategy behind there other than a personal preference.
Yeah.
So earlier in my career, like I said, I worked with software companies. One of the software companies was sponsoring a Formula One racing team. It was the Ray Hall Letterman racing team. And so it was a good team at that point. They had the Indy 500 winner, Buddy Rice. Danica Patrick was on that team and just starting up. Mm-hmm. But, there was really no concept behind or value behind why they were sponsoring it. It was just like, hey, we're sponsoring this. And so then when I got involved, I got to work on it and I saw there was actually a value proposition. Like, they were a software and technology company, and the things they were doing with servers and with, whatever, at the enterprise level, Formula One racing is actually pretty technical. And obviously it takes a lot of engineering and takes a lot of the same types of things that they were doing in a kind of a boring corporate level. And so kind of once they tied those two together in the campaign, it was actually very successful, and then they got a lot more leads. And so I think that's really a great lesson for anyone listening. One of the biggest complaints we always get from marketers is, I don't have big enough budget. I don't have a big enough budget. It doesn't matter how big the budget is, if you don't have a value proposition. Yeah, like when I interviewed the CMO of Mint Mobile, I was mentioning, we interviewed him on the podcast, and he was going up against, Mint Mobile goes some of the biggest media budgets in the world when you look at cell phone companies. And he's like, the only way we're going to beat them is by having tight commercials that have a clear value proposition that we're going to hit over and over, and then people will understand that value we deliver.
Yeah. And
so the first...
Sorry, and I just had the thing.
Sorry.
As you said, I think sports sponsorships and sponsorships in general are some of the most difficult briefs. And what I always tell clients is like, what is your role here? Like, whatever the sport, whatever the event is, like, the first question to answer is that, like, if you don't have a role, and role doesn't mean that you're a sports brand. A lot of known sports brands, for example, do really great sports work, but just because they have a clear role. And they come into whether they are, in the stands or on the court, it doesn't matter. Like, you need to have a role. You need to say something. And that has nothing to do with money. I think some sports sponsorships work really well without massive budgets because they are very clear. They're just very, very clear.
And I think that ties into what is the value proposition of the company? What do they stand for? What value do they deliver in the world? And then understanding how everything that company does, whether it's sponsorships or it's the products they're making, the ads they're making, how does that tie into and communicate that value? Or else you just kind of get this muddy message in the world, like you said, that doesn't really say anything.
Yeah.
Right? Or that any other company could just slap their logo on there.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, any company could just slap on and say, we sponsor the Olympics, Like why does it actually, tie in? How does it actually make sense there? Well, the first half we talked about some of the things you made. That's something we get to do as marketers and advertisers. We make things, those campaigns. And then the second half we talk about people we collaborate with. Collaboration is so important in our industry. And so the first person we want to talk about, and my Italian's not so great, so feel free to correct me if I pronounce it wrong. I think it's Elio Bronzino. Yep. Elio Bronzino.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's great.
He was the executive creative director at Bozell Milan, and he said, "If you don't like it, nobody else will." Well, how did you learn this lesson from him?
Uh, and this is another golden rule or lesson. Like, I think it's one of the things I always say to creatives. It stuck with me. It's so important for this industry and working in it. Like, you need to have to say, you need to be here because you want to say something, express a point of view, or just bring your likes and dislikes and influences to the table. So that's one of the things that is crucially important. And yeah, when I started working, Elio was my first mentor. He was an incredible creative director, a really funny guy. He had been one of the big copywriters in Italian advertising for many years, and he was writing really fun comedy stuff, and he was famous because of a campaign where a pig was used as a tester for different mayo brands. Anyways, that was his claim to fame. So I started to work with him, and it was always telling me, you need to like it. You're writing it for yourself first, and if you like it, then other people will like it. So don't worry about the kind of thing you wanna bring to the table. And so, I was working on a sofa company at the time, Divani, which is one of the biggest. It's a big global brand. They sell. It's called Natuzzi, the owner. They sell sofas everywhere in the world. And we had an account, and we had an opportunity to make a commercial, a bigger commercial than usual. And he was like, "Okay, go. What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Okay, what do I like?" And at the time, I was very much into Monty Python, the comedy, as anyone back then. And I was like, "Oh, I love The Life of Brian," which was again a pretty controversial film about if you haven't never watched it, watch it. It's really funny. It's the life of someone who was born the same day as Jesus Christ, and he has a parallel existence, and it's a really funny comedy. So I was like, "Oh, maybe doing something with Jesus would be fun. I love to do something." And so I wrote this commercial that was about Jesus performing a miracle and multiplying, instead of water and loaves, which is one of the famous miracles in the Bible. He was multiplying sofas and seats. It was the dumbest commercial, but it was what I wanted to do, and it's like, and Ilya was like, "Oh, this is funny. This could work." It's like, yeah, it's all about, Jesus comes and sofas go from small to big because he multiplied the seats. Perfect. And so we started writing it, and it was like a, blockbuster thing. And we brought it to the clients, and they were like, "Oh, this is funny. We could do this." And it went all the way to the owner of the company, and he was like, "Yeah, I think this could be cool." And we spoke to directors, looked for locations, and they were like, "Well, let us do one last thing. We'll submit it to the Vatican to see if they think it's going to be okay to run on Italian television." The Vatican has no power over Italian television, but let's just get an opinion. And we were in pre-production, and the Vatican came back saying, "No way." No Jesus, no. You cannot do a commercial about Jesus multiplying sofas. So we did something else. But, I was very young back then and just started in advertising. And that for me was super inspiring because the commercial was dumb, but it was on point. Was I think could have been a really good, fun campaign. And I was so proud that I got to write something that was inspired by Monty Python, and I was almost getting away with it. And there's nothing better than that.
But it took the Vatican itself to quash
Yeah.
the idea. I've heard of clients killing ideas. I've never heard of the Vatican killing one. That's impressive.
Yeah, but,
So I like that.
yeah.
I like that story because, go on.
No, I mean, they're quite powerful like that. They have a whole communications center that, gives opinions on TV shows and stuff. So, they shouldn't, but they
I
do.
bet. And it sounds like Bennett.
Yeah.
Benetton didn't run it by them. But no, I really like that because one thing we have talked about on the podcast is something you have to be careful for is you are not your customer, right? So that's on the one hand. It's like you're not your customer and they might not like the same things you do. And as I have given an example before of, when I started as a copywriter, I was, fresh out of college and I wrote a campaign for Vail and Bachelor Gulch Village and, very expensive third, fourth ski in, ski out homes for, very wealthy people in Vail, which is a very luxurious resort. And my campaign was something along the lines of sleep in and then enjoy skiing or something. And, my boss told me that the campaign never left the agency because he's like, these are the titans of industry. He's like, they're not sleeping in. He's like, they're up at 4 or 5 a.m. to see the markets all over the world. And, which blew my mind because I had, why be rich? At that age, I think, why be rich if you can't sleep in? I just, gotten out of college and never took a class before noon. And so in that sense, I was not the customer and that didn't fit and that didn't work. But on the flip side of it is, like you said, this is a creative endeavor and pouring your creative self into it. And so, because I think there are also deeper truths, which are deeper human truths. So what you're talking about wasn't necessarily, hey, how does a couch work or is a couch comfortable for someone of this age or this demographic? You're talking about a deeper human truth there. And one of the things that really struck me, I think a corollary to that is, if you don't believe it, no one else will. And that's why we need to kind of put that real belief in it. Because I remember I was reading this article once on North Korean propaganda, right? And some of the things they had talked about, it was it was one, they were talking about the leader there. He once made a hand grenade from a pine cone to blow up an American tank or something. And it got me thinking of, there's writers behind that North Korean propaganda, just like in an ad agency or anywhere.
Yeah.
And, I've definitely been, with agencies or with clients where they've come up with some ideas and I'm like, who would believe that? That's so ridiculous. And thinking, obviously in that situation, the writers can't kind of speak truth to power and say to their client and say, wait a minute, I don't know if people are going to believe you really made a hand grenade out of a pine cone. But I think as writers ourselves, we have that chance. Like you said, we have to, if you don't like it, nobody else will. If you don't believe it, nobody else will. And so I would also encourage, writers, creatives, everyone listening, as you're putting yourself into your work, you also have to keep that in mind. We're not going to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Carlo's example is a great example because he tied into a deep human truth. But you also have to realize when kind of the agency or when the marketing department comes up or the CMO comes up with something ridiculous, you got to speak up against that.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Yeah, I mean, have you ever been in that situation where it's kind of the opposite of the CMO or the marketing department? They've got some ridiculous idea, and it's not necessarily that it's not a good creative idea. It's just that it's not very believable in the marketplace.
Yeah. I call those situations the emperor's new clothes, right? It's exactly that. Like sometimes you're in situations where you go through rounds of work and conversations, and then you're in a room and think, why is nobody saying anything? This doesn't make any sense. Like, shall we have and usually I think as a company, we are quite good at that because we try to have those kind of conversations, hard conversations at the start. At strategy level, it never gets to creative, but yes, you experience that. And you're very right when you talk about belief, because ultimately, our work is all about belief. It's a combination of belief, personal taste, and ownership. And ownership can only come from belief. The problem with another problem with the project I was talking, the Olympics project I was mentioning before, is that nobody was really owning it. and everybody was good at bringing new elements to it, but and things that had to happen, but nobody was like saying, not the CMO, none of our side was saying, okay, this is what I really want to do, this is what I believe in, and if you don't have that, that's good things are not going to happen.
I think that's where you need to bring the humanity to marketing, because you have to realize what a big brand or company or organization is at the end of the day. It's this kind of false fabrication of an interaction with what should actually be a human being, right? Like we as humans, if we ever really thought it through, we wouldn't want to be dealing with these megalith corporations, right? We're actually kind of like I said in the beginning, the quote from Flint McLaughlin, our CEO, people don't buy from websites, people don't buy from marketing, people buy from people. At the end of the day, there's some person on the other side of that they feel connected to. I think a great example of that, as you talk about putting yourself in your work, I know he's controversial, but when you look at Elon Musk, think about any other car company out there, and most people probably don't know who's behind it making cars or the CEO or whatever. But when people are buying Teslas, they're kind of buying the brand for sure, but they're buying Elon Musk, right? They either believe in him or they don't. And I think every other brand is trying to do that on some level, kind of bring that humanity that somehow he's naturally been able to bring to that brand. So in the next lesson, you talk about Alvaro Sotomayor, the creative director at Wieden & Kennedy, and from him, you learn to finish what you started, and somehow this had to do with building a submarine in the center of Milan. What was going on there?
Yeah, again, the lesson is bigger than the story, but the lesson is another lesson that I think it's really important for our industry and ourselves working in it, which is, I always think that, advertising and people working in it are a bit like, it's like the same thing happens with, screenwriters in Hollywood. Like everybody has a film idea, but the ones that get made are the ones that get written at some point. and same with advertising. It's all about ownership and seeing your project through. Same with marketing. A lot of companies have ideas and things they want to do and things that maybe could happen, but the things that happen are really, again, the things that have clear ownership and someone that believes in them and someone that wants to push them through. And working with Alvaro was great because, from the beginning, we were on a mission to make, and we almost promised each other every project we'll start, we'll finish it. And one of the first projects was was again for Nike. There was this entire, again, World Cup campaign that was based on a boat. And our idea was the entire campaign is on the boat. Then when we have local experiential activations, we can have parts of the boat. And then they were like, well, maybe we'll make a submarine. We'll make a Nike submarine, a football submarine, which was like the wackiest idea ever. And we presented it, and they were like, it's kind of interesting about a submarine. Like, how do you go about building a submarine? And we were like, Alvaro especially was like, I want to build a submarine. We can build a submarine. So we went on a full-on research and really studied submarines and how they were built, and we had a product designer that had built boats before, helping us creating a blueprint, and then we spoke to people that made, because it had to be transported in the center of the city. We spoke with fiberglass experts and everything. So it was a whole journey until, one day, finally, we had this submarine placed in the middle of Milan. And it was a submarine. You could watch videos inside and play football on the outside. One of the sides of the submarine was like a goal post. And I I remember being there and looking at the thing and say, "Hey, we made a submarine in the end." And again, that's just like a symbolic way of saying that I always tell people you should try to build your submarine, and for me that means like when you believe in an idea and you wanna make it see the light. You have to go through the hoops and you have to go um, through whatever it takes to make it happen. It's not easy. Everybody can have ideas, but finishing them is a whole different sport.
Oh, it's so true. Like great things don't happen, or these great products don't come out, great campaigns don't happen just because someone had a great
Yeah,
idea. It's like there's so many people can come up with great
yeah,
ideas. Fewer can execute. I remember there was a meme a while ago, and I'll probably mess it up, but it was basically like a chart. And at first it showed like the excitement of the idea, and it's like through the roof. And then it goes to like the banality of
yeah,
execution and just
yeah,
drops down to
yeah.
nothing. So so I think there's the one that the fortitude to be able to stick through the idea, and I think the other thing is the guts to bring it to the world. So like we talked about Elon Musk. GM had an electric vehicle before then. They just didn't really have the guts to make it happen. I mean, very famous Apple iPhone. Nokia invented it
Yeah.
first. Nokia just didn't have the guts to go all in on it. And so it's fun when you look at the really true great ideas, the products, the marketing campaigns. It's not just the idea, like you said, it's the ability to actually get it made, to make it happen. Let's talk about one final lesson here. This is from Glenn Cole, the founder of 72 and Sunny, who you are still working with today. He said, if it's not great, it's probably bad. and this was in relation to
Yeah.
a campaign for a CD video game script.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that Glenn got from someone else working at Wyden before him, and I don't remember the name of the person, but yes, it's again, connected to what we were talking about before. There's a fine line between failure and success in advertising, and great ideas might be great on paper, but then when it gets to it, if you don't put yourself into it, if you don't work on them, if everybody involved, in your team, on the client side, believe in them, they're not going to happen. And when I started working with Glenn, he gave me this project that was like it was like a video game for Nike, and the thing entailed, I don't know, writing 100 pages of dialogue for different athletes, and I never done that before. And he was like, "You can get there. It just it just." I remember it's like it just needs to be really good, and to be really good, you really have to put everything into it. And so I remember writing a first draft, going back to him and going, "What do you think? Is this great?" And he was like, "It's great. 10% of it." And that was the start. And I think, what I learned from him is that, again, if you want to go from bad to good, you can do it. And I think, a lot of, I would say, more than 50%, probably even more of what you see in advertising, I would say 80% probably is from bad to good. Like, and it's just going from good to great that requires that extra push. And I think the lesson for me was that like if you let anything slip, or if you don't dedicate yourself to the thing completely, you can easily drop from great to bad. You can quickly drop from great to bad in matter of seconds. So it's impossible to have the same level of intensity and the same level of dedication with each project now, because things move a lot faster than they used to move 20 years ago. That's a fact. But one thing that is important for me, and I think it should be important for marketers in general, is sometimes decide that you want to get great and maybe prioritize certain things that require more your attention, and try to push them to be as good as they can be. It cannot be everything, but sometimes you need to get to great, because if it's not great, it's it's often bad.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I was talking about Tesla before. I had an electric car, and you talk about like electric car charging times, and it's however long, 24 hours or whatever. But really, it charges to 80% pretty darn quickly.
Yeah.
It's getting from that 80% to 100% where it's slow. And that kind of reminds me of what all we've been talking about. What you just said, all we've been talking about is getting through all those ideas, getting past the 80% to like that truly great. Because I remember in college, it's funny, I took a class about comic book writing, of all things, which is why I loved your comic book background. But and one of the things I learned about was the group of artists that used to make the Looney Tunes shows. The Looney Tunes actually used to be these little short clips before movies, and they had a certain amount of time and budget for each. And what they did was they would kind of shorten a few of the other ones. Like, instead of it, they had a full week budget, they would just do them in 3 days to save up that time to make one, like you said, that was truly great. Because that's what it takes. It takes that extra focus. It takes that extra commitment, and it takes all the things we talked about, seeing it through to the end, and having a client and being able to work with a client and kind of training a client and training people on the marketing side to really want to do something great, something visionary, and something at the end of the day, I think, that serves the customer because it ties into some true gold.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's when we really get that great idea, I think that is some reflection of humanity, of this whole human condition. We've really tapped into some true understanding of what it means to be human, and just that product's role in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my opinion. I think that's what great advertising is. So, as with the famous The Truth Well Told, I forgot who said that now, but The Truth Well Told. I mean, I think that's the perfect description.
I think it's McKenna Erickson motto.
McCann Erickson, yeah. I mean, that's essentially what we're trying to do. When you talk about all the diving you were doing with that World Cup campaign, for example, you were trying to dig to get to that essential truth that when everyone sees it, that's what every artist does, right? When you hear a great joke, or when you read a great book, or when you see a great movie, I don't think that it's necessarily, this is some new idea that's new to the world. It's tapping into something deep in you that you always really understood, but you couldn't put into words. When I hear a great song, I mean, I'm a big Pearl Jam fan. I love Eddie Vedder's lyrics. And when I hear him talk about it, it's not like, oh, I didn't know those things about life. It's like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I never thought to put it that way. And I think that's really too, when that ideal customer for that brand, obviously use Benetton as an example. They're also trying to tell some people you're not the ideal customer, right? So when it's for that ideal customer for that brand and you see that, wow, you've tapped into something in them, right? Yeah. So that's what I love about the creative process personally. Well, let's end with, we've talked about a lot of different stories, a lot of different lessons you've learned about, sticking to it, about finding the great idea. What does it take to do this? What are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
I think, it would be easy to say resilience or work hard. I think that's how you do it. I think for me, it has always been being able to listen. I think, because it's a collaborative process and because you always need input and insights, I think listening is the most important thing. And that's been crucial in my own career. I've never been very outspoken as a marketer. I'm never the first one to speak, but I think listening is the most important thing because you're listening to culture, you're listening to what brands need, you're listening to what's going on and what people like. So I feel like if you're a good listener, you probably end up being a good marketer or creative because you are able to interiorize the thing that create those human connections that you're talking about. And that's very true. Like when you can connect with people via a truth, that's when the magic happens. And I think you can get to that truth by listening. And then, once you have the information you need and the point of view you need, then it's all about hard work. And, we spoke about it a lot today, but then, resilience and sticking with things and finishing what you started. And that's all you need to bring to life your belief and your point of view that you formulated. But without listening, without having a capacity of understanding what happens around you or what people need or want, I think it's impossible. It makes me think, now that I say it, of that terrible movie about advertising called What Women Want with Mel Gibson. But it's kind of true. Like I hate that movie, but I think what he does in the film is he listens. Like all of a sudden he listens. So I think that's very, very much like probably requirement number one.
Well, thank you, Carlo. Grazie. It's been great listening to you. I've learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to all of you who are listening to us. I hope you've got at least one golden nugget of wisdom that helps you improve your marketing and advertising.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.